Arcane Studios are the creators of prominent series such as Dishonored, the Prey reboot, and more recently, Deathloop. They have years of experience under their belt and a distinct style of gameplay that they have mastered over the years. They've got a distinct pedigree for success, which is odd, because their latest game, Redfall, is the most aggressively average and mundane shooter that I have ever played in a long time. Even before release, Redfall was met with controversy and criticism over its lack of features, such as 60 frames per second mode on consoles. But it's clear from the final release that the development of this game has more than likely been anything than a smooth ride. Redfall pulls from the AAA playbook on game design. It does nothing original or innovative. It is an amalgamation of different games such as Destiny, Left 4 Dead, and of course, even their own franchise, Dishonored. You're dropped into the town of Redfall, which has been overrun by a horde of bloodthirsty vampires and their fanatical followers. Vampires in their own right are a cool concept. The thought of fighting a supernatural undead enemy that isn't a zombie or a skeleton or a ghost for once is an appealing thought. But this is where the first problem arises because Redfall's vampires are lacking. In my playtime, I never once felt threatened by any of the vampire enemies, and this is because their AI and fighting styles are predictable and buggy. There was more than one occasion when a vampire would simply sit there and let me finish it off without even putting up so much as a fight. Their designs look menacing and threatening, but they're anything but that. I had no trouble dispatching them without even a second thought. Even the game mechanic of having to run up to a wounded vampire to finish them off with a stake to the heart doesn't feel remotely challenging either. This becomes even more trivial not even an hour or two into the game when you begin to acquire weapons such as the UV light cannon, which petrifies vampires and allows you to disintegrate them with a couple of well-placed shots to the head. There are also the stake launchers which, while admittedly quite fun, they also serve to trivialise the encounters as well. As well as this, the game attempts to persuade you to take a more stealthy approach, but like myself, most people will probably just decide to take a more guns blazing approach. What I found in these situations is that the non-vampire enemy AI is just as easily exploitable, and they're just as inept as the vampires themselves. You're routinely able to take out a handful of enemies who are standing right next to each other before even the rest of the group cottons onto your presence. It's a dull and mundane experience, and it doesn't challenge players. This is especially true if you, like myself, play as the character Devinder, who has a lightning rod ability that can shock and stun enemies and chain lightning between them. This lightning rod ability can also kill low health vampires from a distance, again that trivialises the encounters with them. Devinder also has an ultimate ability that casts out UV light and petrifies any nearby vampires. It's kind of similar to the UV cannons. It really mostly feels like a bit of a get out of jail free card. The world of Redfall itself also suffers from what I would call the Destiny 1 problem, in that the world doesn't feel alive or inhabited at all. As mentioned earlier, the game entices you with the prospect of moving through the world slowly and methodically in a stealthy manner. But what's the point when you can have moments like this where I can sprint down the middle of a street and I don't feel threatened at all because there aren't any enemies around to stop me? This insistence on slowing down the gameplay feels like an attempt to make the game world of Redfall seem bigger than it actually is. In the few hours of playtime that I've had with the game, I've managed to explore more than half of the game world already, and it was a mostly underwhelming experience at best. There's nothing to entice me, the world feels barren and it has no redeeming aspects to it. It's not an enjoyable place to slog through, and slog you will, because Redfall's mission structure is nothing more than you being an errand boy for a bunch of characters that you'll inevitably not care about in the slightest. You'll get extra missions from safe houses as well, which end with you hunting down an especially powerful vampire, an underboss, and making the neighbourhood that was under their influence safer. It overall feels like mindless and meaningless busy work, and the repetition honestly begins to grate after a while. As I mentioned earlier, Redfall feels like an amalgamation of a bunch of different games, and it doesn't feel original or innovative in its own right. Destiny in particular seems to have been a massive draw of inspiration for the team over at Arcane. Your abilities are mapped to controls that are very similar, you've got a looting and rarity system for weapons, and you also have the vampire nest, and these feel like a less refined and watered down version of Destiny's Lost Sectors. As feared, the game also runs poorly on Xbox Series consoles as well. All gameplay in this video is from the Xbox Series X version of the game, and even when locked to 30 frames per second, it still can't keep up in some cases. This impacts on the gameplay, resulting in a clunky and cumbersome experience where you can struggle to hit your shots on a consistent basis. The game also isn't exactly a looker either, resulting in an aesthetic reminiscent of the early days of the Xbox One and PS4. It isn't an advertisement for quality, and it doesn't instill confidence. A game that has been touted as one of Xbox Game Studios' first big releases of the year shouldn't suffer from a fate like this. Redfall is the epitome of a fundamentally flawed, rushed out of the door, cash grab AAA game. It has no redeeming qualities and is a stain on the track record of Arcane. It's not fun to play, it's yet another generic first-person shooter that borrows from other games that are infinitely more enjoyable to play. Redfall is aggressively average, as I mentioned at the start of this review. But it straddles that line where, because of its performance issues, it falls into the bad game camp. Even if there are patches to improve performance and other gameplay issues, I fear that the damage is already done. You can polish a turd as much as you want, but it can't hide the fact that, at the end of the day, it's still a turd. I very much recommend that you avoid Redfall at all costs. It's genuinely an appalling game. On top of this, I couldn't even recommend it as a game to download through Game Pass. This game is, quite frankly, a travesty, and all I'll say is players deserve better than what is on show here.